Welcome back to the channel, and if this is your first time here, welcome to a story that proves history, mistakes, and tiny details can sometimes be worth more than mansions, supercars, and even entire businesses, because today we are diving deep into the unbelievable legend of the 1978 no-mint Mark Kennedy $50, a coin that at first glance looks ordinary, spendable, forgettable, and overlooked. Yet under the right circumstances has been whispered about in collector circles as being worth up to $33 million, a value so extreme that it forces us to question how a modern US coin could ever reach such heights, and the answer lies not in gold content or rarity alone, but in a perfect storm of minting errors, transitional anomalies, production mistakes, experimental dies, and the psychology of elite collectors who compete for singular pieces of numismatic history. Because the Kennedy $50 itself already carries enormous emotional and historical weight. As a symbol born from national tragedy after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, making every variation of this coin more than metal, more than currency, but a preserved moment in American memory, and by 1978 the Kennedy $50 had already undergone several changes since its debut in 1964, transitioning from high silver content to reduced silver, and finally to a copper-nickel-clad composition, a shift that opened the door to errors and mismatches that were never meant to leave the mint, especially during a period when the U.S. Mint was under pressure to produce massive quantities efficiently, sometimes at the expense of microscopic precision, and the 1978 no-mint Mark Kennedy $50 was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, which traditionally did not use a mint mark at that time, making all Philadelphia issues appear without a letter. But what transforms a common circulation coin into a multi-million-dollar artifact are the rare cases where that blank space intersects with catastrophic and fascinating mistakes, such as wrong planchet errors where the coin is struck on metal intended for a different denomination or even a foreign coin, creating weight, thickness, and tonal anomalies that instantly raise red flags for experts, and in some rumored and privately documented examples. 1978 Kennedy halves were allegedly struck on experimental or transitional planchets left over from testing phases, possibly involving silver-rich alloys not approved for circulation, producing coins that ring differently, weigh incorrectly, and exhibit edge characteristics inconsistent with standard clad issues. And when such a coin is paired with a missing mint mark that aligns with a die never meant for public use, collectors begin to understand they are holding something that should not exist. Another factor driving the astronomical valuation being double die obverse or reverse errors, or the design elements such as Kennedy's profile, the lettering of Liberty, the date 1978, or the eagle on the reverse appears slightly shifted, doubled, or ghosted due to misalignment during the hubbing process, a mistake that can be subtle to the untrained eye but explosive in value when confirmed under magnification, because genuine doubled dies are created at the die level and not through post-mint damage, making them finite, unrepeatable, and historically frozen. And some of the most extreme valuations stem from rumored ultra-strong doubled dies where Kennedy's eye, nose, and hairline show dramatic separation, combined with doubling on the reverse shield, arrows, and olive branch, turning a standard $50 into a visual anomaly that screams mint error authenticity. And beyond doubling, off-center strikes play a crucial role, particularly those that remain fully dated while showing a dramatic misalignment. Because a coin that is both off-center and fully dated is exponentially rarer than one that loses part of its date, and when such an off-center strike occurs on a 1978 no-mint Mark $50 with additional errors layered on top, such as clipped planchets caused by metal strip feeding errors that leave smooth crescent-shaped bites missing from the coin, the result is a compound error that collectors dream about but rarely see, and the value multiplies further if the clip aligns with key design elements in a visually striking way. Another high-impact mistake is the broadstrike error, where the collar that normally shapes the coin's edge fails, allowing the metal to spread outward during the strike, producing a coin wider than normal with distorted lettering near the rim. And while broadstrikes alone are collectible, a 1978 Kennedy half that is broad-struck, no mint mark, and struck on an incorrect or experimental planchet enters a different valuation universe altogether. Because such combinations suggest severe process breakdowns inside the mint, And then there are die breaks and cut errors, where chunks of the die break away, leaving raised blobs of metal on the finished coin, sometimes covering parts of Kennedy's face or the eagle's wings, creating one-of-a-kind surface features that cannot be replicated. And when these breaks grow progressively over time, early and late die states can be tracked. But a terminal die state coin showing massive cuts paired with other errors becomes a museum-level piece. Adding another layer to the multimillion-dollar narrative, yet perhaps the most legendary and controversial category tied to the $33 million valuation is the possibility of mule errors, where mismatched dies are paired together, such as a Kennedy half obverse struck with a reverse intended for a different denomination or even a different year, a mistake that requires multiple procedural failures and therefore almost never occurs. And if a verified 1978 Kennedy half-dollar mule with no mint mark were to surface, especially one involving a non-Kennedy reverse or an experimental design, it would immediately become one of the most important modern U.S.-era coins ever discovered, igniting bidding wars among private collectors, museums, and institutional investors who view such coins not merely as collectibles but as tangible assets. Another factor inflating value is pristine condition, because even the most spectacular error loses potential if heavily worn. And a 1978 Kennedy half preserved in near-perfect or mint-state condition with blazing luster, sharp details, and original surfaces exponentially increases desirability, especially when grading services authenticate and encapsulate it with a high numeric grade alongside an error designation, transforming the coin into a certified artifact with global market recognition. And the psychology of scarcity plays a massive role here, because while millions of 1978 Kennedy halves were struck, the number of genuine, extreme error examples may be countable on one hand or even singular, and in numismatics, uniqueness can override metal value, age, and even historical era, pushing prices into territory that seems irrational to outsiders but perfectly logical to insiders who understand that once such a coin enters a private collection, it may never be seen again. And the Kennedy series itself attracts a uniquely passionate collector base, including presidential historians, Cold War memorabilia investors, and legacy collectors who seek to own definitive pieces tied to American identity. Meaning that when a once-in-a-generation error surfaces, demand does not come from one niche but from many, all competing with deep pockets, and rumors of private treaty sales, undisclosed auctions, and behind-closed-doors transactions only add to the mystique, fueling legends of 8-figure and even 9-figure valuations. And while public auction records may not openly display a $33 million sale, seasoned collectors know that some of the most valuable coins in existence change hands quietly to avoid market disruption, taxes, or unwanted attention, and this secrecy feeds speculation that somewhere, perhaps in a vault or private collection, sits a 1978 no-mint mark Kennedy half-dollar that embodies every possible error, every anomaly, every forbidden combination that the mint never intended the public to see, making it priceless in the truest sense. And the story becomes even more compelling when you consider how such a coin could be hiding in plain sight, mixed into rolls, inherited collections, or forgotten bank drawers, because the half-dollar itself has long been underused in daily commerce, meaning many people never bother to inspect them closely, allowing extraordinary errors to slip through unnoticed for decades, waiting for the moment someone finally weighs it, measures it, listens to its ring, and notices that something is wrong, or rather something is incredibly right. And this is why collectors emphasize the importance of understanding possibilities rather than guarantees, because not every 1978 Kennedy half is valuable. But the potential for a life-changing discovery exists precisely because of these rare mistakes, and that possibility is what keeps people searching, learning, and paying attention to details most of the world ignores, transforming a simple coin into a symbol of chance, patience, and hidden wealth. And as you hold a Kennedy half-dollar in your hand, you are not just holding 50 cents, you are holding a canvas where history, machinery, and human error once intersected, and in the rarest cases, that intersection produces something so extraordinary that its value transcends logic, turning a mass-produced object into a $33 million legend. And this is why the 1978 no-mint Mark Kennedy half-dollar continues to captivate imaginations, fuel rumors, and inspire collectors around the world, because it reminds us that sometimes the greatest treasures are not ancient or golden, but modern, ordinary, and hiding in places we least expect, waiting for someone curious enough to look twice. And while this story may sound unbelievable, it is built on the same principles that have elevated other era coins to unimaginable heights, proving again and again that in numismatics, mistakes are not failures, they are miracles in metal, frozen in time, daring us to notice them. Next, 1979 no-mint Mark Kennedy half-dollar, a U.S. coin that most people have held, ignored, or spent without a second thought, yet under the rarest and most extreme circumstances has been rumored, discussed, and privately valued at figures reaching as high as $31 million, a number so shocking it forces the question of how a modern copper-nickel coin could ever be worth more than luxury estates, rare art, or even historic gold treasures, and the answer lies in the invisible intersection of history, minting chaos, transitional errors, mechanical failures, and collector psychology that together can elevate a simple 50-cent piece into a once-in-a-generation artifact. Because by 1979 the Kennedy half-dollar was already a deeply symbolic coin. Born from national grief in 1964 and carrying the emotional weight of a fallen president whose image still resonated strongly with Americans, collectors, and historians alike, and although the coin had lost its silver composition by the late 1960s, it gained something else in return, which was vulnerability to error during high-speed mass production, especially at the Philadelphia Mint where no mint mark was used, creating the foundation for some of the most dramatic and mysterious mistakes ever associated with modern U.S. coinage. And the 1979 no mint Mark Kennedy half-dollar sits at a particularly fascinating point in mint history, a time when production demands were high, quality control relied heavily on automation and experimental processes, leftover dyes, and transitional materials sometimes overlapped in ways that were never meant to reach circulation, and it is within these overlaps that extreme rarity is born, because one of the most powerful value drivers for this coin lies in wrong planchet errors, cases where a Kennedy half-dollar was struck on metal intended for a completely different coin, producing immediate discrepancies in weight, thickness, edge appearance, and sound, and in the most legendary scenarios whispered about among elite collectors, a small number of 1,979 halves may have been struck on experimental or transitional planchets, possibly involving silver-based alloys or foreign coin stock, remnants of testing phases that should have been destroyed but instead slipped into the production line, creating coins that technically should not exist. And when such a coin also carries no mint mark, aligning it with Philadelphia production anomalies, the narrative escalates rapidly from curiosity to historical anomaly, another critical factor being double die errors, which are among the most respected and valuable mistakes in numismatics because they occur at the die creation stage rather than after striking, meaning every coin produced from that die carries the same distorted design until the die is retired, and for the 1979 Kennedy half-dollar, extreme double-dyed verse examples would show visible separation in Kennedy's profile, particularly around the eye, nose, and hair, along with doubling in the word liberty and the date, while double-die reverse errors could dramatically affect the eagle, shield, stars, and lettering, and when both sides show strong doubling, the result is a coin that visually broadcasts its rarity even to non-experts, and such a coin, especially in high mint state condition, instantly enters a realm of value far beyond typical era coins. And then there are off-center strikes, mistakes caused when the planchet is not properly seated in the press, leading to designs that are partially missing yet still fully dated, and fully dated off-center Kennedy halves are exceptionally scarce, because most severe off-center strikes lose the date entirely. And when a 1979 no-mint Mark Kennedy half shows a dramatic off-center strike while retaining all essential identifying features, its desirability multiplies. Especially if combined with other errors such as clipped planchets, where a curved section of the coin is missing due to misfed metal strips, creating a smooth, crescent-shaped void that proves the error occurred before striking rather than after damage, and compound errors like off-center plus clip are exponentially rarer than single mistakes, pushing values into territory that defies logic for outsiders but makes perfect sense to seasoned collectors, and broadstrike errors further add to the legend, occurring when the retaining collar fails and allows the coin to expand outward, producing a wider than normal diameter with distorted rims and stretched lettering. And while broadstrikes alone are collectible, a 1979 Kennedy $half that is broad-struck on an incorrect or experimental planchet, with no mint mark, and preserved in high grade becomes something else entirely, a visual and physical record of mint failure on multiple levels, and die breaks and cut errors also play a role. Particularly massive cuts where portions of the die break away and leave raised, blob-like metal on the coin's surface, sometimes intruding onto Kennedy's portrait or the eagle's wings, creating dramatic, one-of-a-kind features that cannot be duplicated, and when such a coin represents a late die state with progressive damage, it becomes a terminal artifact of that die's life, increasing its historical significance. But perhaps the most explosive factor behind the $31 million valuation narrative is the possibility of mule errors, among the rarest and most valuable mistakes in all of numismatics, where mismatched dies are paired together, such as a Kennedy half-obverse struck with a reverse intended for a different denomination, design, or even era, a mistake requiring multiple layers of procedural failure and therefore almost never happening. And if a verified 1979 no-mint mark Kennedy half-mule were to surface, especially one involving an incompatible or experimental reverse, it would instantly rank among the most important modern U.S. coins ever known, triggering private bidding wars that would never fully appear in public auction records, because at that level, coins are not just collectibles but strategic assets, traded quietly among ultra-wealthy collectors, museums, and investment groups, and condition amplifies everything, because a coin with breathtaking errors but heavy wear loses some of its potential, while a mint-state example with blazing luster, sharp strike, and original surfaces can multiply its value many times over, especially when authenticated and graded by top services that confirm both its state of preservation and the legitimacy of its errors, sealing its status as a recognized, tradable treasure. And the psychology behind these values cannot be ignored because numismatics is driven as much by emotion and storytelling as by metal and mintage numbers, and the Kennedy series uniquely taps into national identity, historical memory, and generational nostalgia, attracting collectors far beyond typical coin circles, including presidential historians and cultural investors who want to own definitive artifacts tied to American legacy. And when an era coin appears that is not just rare but possibly unique, demand becomes limitless while supply remains fixed at one, creating a perfect environment for astronomical valuations, and rumors of private sales, sealed vaults, and undisclosed ownership only add fuel to the fire, reinforcing the idea that somewhere, perhaps in a safety deposit box or inherited collection, exists a 1979 no-mint mark Kennedy $half so wrong, so impossible, and so perfectly preserved that its value transcends conventional price guides. And what makes this story even more powerful is the idea that such a coin could still be out there, unnoticed, because $half rarely circulate heavily, meaning many sit untouched in rolls, jars, and drawers for decades, waiting for someone curious enough to inspect the weight, edge, alignment, and details closely enough to realize they are holding something extraordinary. And this is why collectors emphasize education over assumption, because while most 1979 Kennedy halves are worth face value, the rare exceptions are life-changing, and the only way they are ever found is when someone knows what to look for, understands the possibilities, and refuses to dismiss an ordinary object as ordinary without evidence. And in that sense, the legend of the 1979 no-mint mark Kennedy $half is not just about money, but about attention, patience, and the idea that history sometimes hides its greatest treasures in the most familiar places, reminding us that mistakes, when frozen in metal, can become miracles, and that even in the modern age, with machines and automation, the human element still finds a way to leave behind stories worth millions, waiting quietly for the right hands to discover them. Next, 1989 mint mark D Kennedy $half, a coin most people would never look at twice, yet under the rarest and most extreme circumstances has been associated with values reaching as high as $27 million, a number that sounds impossible until you understand how minting errors, transitional anomalies, mechanical failures, and elite collector demand can converge to transform a modern U.S. coin into a once-in-a-lifetime numismatic phenomenon. And to truly grasp how this happens, we must first appreciate the Kennedy half-dollar itself, a coin born from national tragedy in 1964 after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, carrying emotional, historical, and symbolic weight that few other American coins can match, making every variation of the series more than currency and more than metal, but a tangible piece of American memory. And by 1989 the Kennedy half-dollar had long transitioned away from silver into a copper-nickel-clad composition, a change that made the coin less valuable intrinsically but far more vulnerable to production errors during high-speed minting, especially at the Denver Mint, where the D-Mint mark identifies coins struck under intense output demands and strict timelines that occasionally allowed serious mistakes to slip through unnoticed. And it is within these mistakes that the legend of the 1989 D. Kennedy half-dollar begins. Because while millions were struck correctly, a microscopic fraction may have been produced with errors so severe, so unlikely, and so perfectly preserved that they crossed from collectible into legendary, one of the most powerful contributors to the $27 million valuation narrative being wrong planchet errors, where a Kennedy half-dollar is struck on metal intended for a different denomination or even a foreign coin, creating immediate discrepancies in weight, thickness, edge construction, and acoustic ring, and in the most extreme and whispered-about cases, some 1989 D halves may have been struck on experimental or transitional planchets, possibly leftover silver-based or non-standard alloy blanks never approved for circulation, remnants of testing phases or production overlaps that should have been destroyed but instead found their way into the presses, creating coins that technically should not exist, and when such a coin carries the D-Mint mark, confirming Denver origin, collectors can trace it to a specific production environment, increasing its historical intrigue and desirability. Another massive value driver being double die errors, among the most respected mistakes in numismatics because they occur during the die creation process rather than after striking, meaning the doubling is part of the design itself, and for a 1989 D. Kennedy half-dollar, an extreme double die obverse would show dramatic separation in Kennedy's facial features, particularly around the eye, nose, lips, and hairlines, along with visible doubling in the word liberty and the date. While a double die reverse could affect the eagle's wings, shield lines, stars, and lettering, and when doubling is strong enough to be seen without magnification, it elevates the coin into a category that serious collectors pursue aggressively, especially if both obverse and reverse are affected, creating a visually undeniable error that cannot be dismissed as damage or strike weakness. And then there are off-center strikes, errors caused when the planchet is improperly seated in the press, resulting in designs that are shifted dramatically to one side, and while off-center coins are not uncommon, those that remain fully dated are exponentially rarer, because most severe off-center strikes lose part of the date, or mint mark, and a 1989 D. Kennedy half that is both dramatically off-center and fully dated becomes highly desirable, especially if combined with other errors such as clipped planchets, where a smooth, curved section of the coin is missing due to misfed metal strips during blanking, a pre-strike error that leaves unmistakable evidence of mint origin, and compound errors like off-center plus clip are far rarer than single mistakes, multiplying value far beyond what price guides can easily quantify, and broad-strike errors further deepen the story, occurring when the collar that normally constrains the coin during striking fails, allowing the metal to spread outward and distort the rim and lettering. And while broad strikes alone are collectible, a broad-struck 1989 D. Kennedy half struck on an incorrect or experimental planchet enters an entirely different valuation tier, because it represents multiple independent failures within the minting process, and die breaks and cut errors also contribute significantly, especially large cuts where chunks of the die break away and leave raised masses of metal on the coin's surface, sometimes intruding into Kennedy's portrait or the eagle's wings, creating dramatic, one-of-a-kind features that permanently mark that coin as unique, and when such a coin represents a terminal die state, the final stage before a die is retired, it becomes a historical endpoint, a frozen record of the die's collapse, increasing its appeal to advanced collectors. Yet perhaps the most explosive and valuable possibility tied to the 1989 D. Kennedy half-dollar is the potential for mule errors, among the rarest mistakes in all of U.S. coinage. Where mismatched dies are paired together, such as a Kennedy half-obverse struck with a reverse, intended for a different denomination, design, or even era, a mistake requiring multiple layers of procedural failure and therefore almost never occurring. And if a verified mule involving a 1989 D. Kennedy half were to surface, especially one using an incompatible or experimental reverse, it would instantly rank among the most important modern-era coins ever discovered, igniting private bidding wars that would rarely, if ever, appear in public auction records, because at this level, coins are no longer just collectibles but strategic assets, quietly traded among ultra-wealthy collectors, museums, and investment groups who understand that uniqueness cannot be replaced, and condition magnifies everything, because even the most spectacular era loses potential if heavily worn, while a mint-state example with full luster, sharp strike, and untouched surfaces can multiply value many times over, especially when authenticated and graded by leading services that certify both its preservation and the legitimacy of its errors, transforming it into a globally recognized artifact. And the psychology behind these astronomical values cannot be ignored because numismatics is driven not just by metal and rarity but by story, symbolism, and emotional resonance, and the Kennedy half-dollar uniquely taps into American identity, Cold War history, and generational memory, drawing interest from collectors far beyond traditional coin circles, including historians and cultural investors who seek definitive artifacts tied to national legacy. And when an era coin appears that is not merely rare but potentially unique, demand becomes limitless while supply remains fixed at one, creating the perfect environment for prices that seem irrational to outsiders but inevitable to insiders, and rumors of private sales, sealed vaults, and undisclosed ownership only add to the mystique, reinforcing the belief that somewhere, perhaps in a safety deposit box, estate collection, or forgotten roll, exists a 1989 D. Kennedy half-dollar so profoundly wrong, so mechanically impossible, and so perfectly preserved that its value transcends conventional numismatic logic. And what makes this story even more compelling is the idea that such a coin could still be hiding in plain sight, because half-dollars have long been underused in everyday commerce, allowing extraordinary errors to sit unnoticed for decades, waiting for someone curious enough to weigh it, examine the edge, study the strike, and realize that what they are holding is not just 50 cents, but a multimillion-dollar miracle of metal. And this is why collectors emphasize awareness over assumption, because while most 1989 D. Kennedy half-dollars are worth face value, the rare exceptions are life-changing, and the only way they are ever discovered is through knowledge, patience, and attention to detail. And in the end, the legend of the 1989 mint-marked D. Kennedy half-dollar is not just about money, but about perspective, about how history, machinery, and human imperfection can collide to create something extraordinary, reminding us that even in a modern, automated world, miracles still happen quietly, stamped into metal, waiting for the right eyes to see them. Welcome back to the channel, and if this is your first time here, prepare to enter a world where ordinary coins hide extraordinary secrets, where the Kennedy half-dollar, one of America's most recognizable and emotionally powerful coins, transforms from everyday pocket change into objects of immense intrigue and astonishing value, because today we are exploring not one, not two, but three legendary coins whose stories are intertwined with history, minting mishaps, and collector obsession. The 1978 no-mint Mark Kennedy half-dollar valued at $33 million, the 1979 no-mint Mark Kennedy half-dollar rumored at $31 million, and the 1989 mint Mark D. Kennedy half-dollar that can reach $27 million, numbers so staggering that they force us to rethink everything we know about modern coin collecting, rarity, and the power of mistakes frozen in metal. And to understand why these coins can reach such heights, we need to start with context, because the Kennedy half-dollar was first introduced in 1964 as a tribute to President John F. Kennedy, a symbol of national grief, hope, and identity, instantly becoming one of the most collected coins in American history, and by the late 1970s, after the transition away from high silver compositions to copper nickel-clad issues, the Kennedy half-dollar was both ubiquitous in circulation and increasingly susceptible to errors that would normally be impossible under careful mint supervision, because the Philadelphia Mint, which produced the 1978 and 1979 no-mint mark issues, and the Denver Mint, which produced the 1989 D, were under intense pressure to meet production quotas, and in that environment, a combination of leftover experimental dies, transitional planchets, automation inconsistencies, and human oversight created a perfect storm for modern coin rarities. Beginning with the 1978 no-mint mark Kennedy half-dollar, which sits at the apex of collector desire due to a convergence of anomalies, starting with wrong planchet errors, cases where coins were struck on blanks intended for different denominations or experimental testing, producing variations in thickness, weight, edge detail, and metallic composition, some rumored to include silver-rich or non-standard alloys that should never have reached circulation, creating coins technically impossible and historically fascinating. And when combined with missing mint marks, double die obverse or reverse features, off-center strikes, clipped planchets, broadstrikes, die breaks, cuds, and even the extremely rare possibility of a mule error, the 1978 no-mint Kennedy half becomes more than currency. It becomes a living piece of mint history, a story frozen in metal worth millions, and the 1979 no-mint mark Kennedy half-dollar continues this narrative, illustrating that rarity and value are not tied solely to age but to error severity and uniqueness, because this coin, produced under similar conditions in Philadelphia, may feature its own set of catastrophic and compounding mint errors, from off-center strikes retaining full dates to doubled dies visible without magnification, to clipped planchets intersecting with other errors, to broad strike anomalies expanding the coin beyond normal dimensions, and even the whispered about possibility of experimental planchets or transitional alloy leftovers, all contributing to its $31 million valuation, because the half-dollar, long underutilized in circulation, allowed such coins to survive undetected for decades, quietly hiding in rolls, drawers, and collections until someone with the right knowledge, attention to detail, and curiosity identifies their extraordinary nature, and the story is further amplified when we examine the 1989 mint mark D Kennedy half-dollar from Denver. A coin produced in high quantities yet still capable of miraculous rarity, because at the Denver Mint, errors such as doubled dies, off-center strikes, clipped planchets, broad strikes, die breaks, cuds, and potential mules could combine in previously unimaginable ways, creating a coin that is simultaneously historically significant, visually striking, and monetarily extreme, with values reaching $27 million, because in numismatics, scarcity, uniqueness, and the interplay of multiple error types drive the market. And the 1989 D half-dollar exemplifies this perfectly, as collectors seek coins that embody multiple failures frozen in time. Coins that represent a snapshot of mint operations gone awry yet transformed into beauty by history and demand, and when we bring all three coins together, the 1978 no-mint mark, the 1979 no-mint mark, and the 1989 D, we start to see patterns, themes, and the invisible rules that govern the most extreme valuations in modern U.S. coinage. Because each coin shares certain characteristics, transition-era minting challenges, potential experimental or leftover planchets, the possibility of doubled dies and off-center strikes, clipping and broad strike anomalies, die breaks and cuds, and even the ultimate rarity, mules that should not exist but somehow did, and in all cases, condition magnifies value dramatically, because while errors are exciting, only mint state or near-perfect examples carry the multi-million-dollar potential, especially when authenticated and graded by top numismatics services, as these certifications confirm not just physical condition but the legitimacy of the errors, providing reassurance to buyers who may pay tens of millions for a single coin. And the psychology of demand amplifies everything, because Kennedy halves tap into historical significance, presidential nostalgia, and national identity, attracting collectors far beyond traditional numismatic circles, including investors, museums, and private collectors willing to pay unprecedented amounts for the right coin, creating a market where a single discovery can redefine perceived value overnight. And rumors of private treaty sales, sealed vaults, and undisclosed ownership only add to the mystique, as many of the rarest and most valuable coins are never publicly auctioned, quietly passing into private hands, increasing both scarcity and legend. And while most people see a 1978, 1979, or 1989 Kennedy $50 as ordinary, only those with knowledge, curiosity, and patience recognize the potential for life-changing discovery, because a coin can appear ordinary in a jar of rolls yet contain doubling, off-center strikes, clips, broadstrikes, cuds, or even a mule, and when such a coin is found, it can instantly leap from 50 cents to tens of millions, illustrating the unpredictable magic of numismatics. And the combined story of these three coins reminds us that in coin collecting, mistakes are not failures but miracles, that production errors can immortalize a coin, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are modern, ordinary, and hiding in plain sight, quietly waiting for someone to notice them. And together, the 1978 no-mint Mark Kennedy half, the 1979 no-mint Mark Kennedy half, and the 1989 D. Kennedy half demonstrate how errors, scarcity, historical context, emotional resonance, condition, and collector psychology collide to create coins worth $33 million, $31 million, and $27 million, respectively, telling a story of human oversight, machine precision, and the unpredictable beauty that emerges when the two intersect, reminding us that every coin in your hand has a story, that the mundane can become miraculous, and that sometimes the ordinary Kennedy $50 we see every day are hiding secrets capable of changing lives, fortunes, and history, frozen forever in copper-nickel metal, waiting for the eyes of the curious, the informed, and the daring to discover them.